Has anybody else apart from Benny finished reading The Black Swan? He's like, yeah, I'll take you out to lunch. Well, don't read it, because we give our students in 2 slides or 3 slides what The Black Swan is all about. And what we try to show here is what Taleb tried to say about the Black Swan. And very, very important driver in systems thinking, and I need to say this, is that we say that the fundamental problem facing all of us is we place total reliance on forecasting and analysis. We are really, really good at forecasting and analysis. And the real question is, why were there only 2 people who warned President Bush at the end of 2007, or sort of September 2007, that we were going to face the biggest economic crunch in the world? And one of them was Taleb. Was because we had this absolute passion. We're going to develop a strategic intent in our company. What's the rand-dollar exchange rate going to be? What's the population rate going to be? All of these good things. I mean, they had to forecast the weather, they might have been in serious trouble. And so what he tells us is that as we continue to operate this notion that the world behaves as a bell curve, we get ourselves into trouble. Because when we teach statistics, we say that anything that sits outside that bell curve is due to an arithmetic error or an experimental error, and you can ignore that. So as long as everything sits under here, you are able away. And so we try and dispel that mindset as a fundamental premise in the systems thinking stuff that we do. So when we talk about social systems, we try to emphasize that this is what's creating the complexity in our organizations. That we've got people in groups, and they are purposeful, they have their own interests, intentions, and generate their own goals, and a key characteristic is they exhibit choices. So I want to take you back to my professor at Wits, who taught me about systems thinking. He said, if you want to understand it, talk about a biological system, the notion of self-organizational characteristics. What's interesting? As I'm standing in front of you here, my heart can't decide who wants to be lungs. But every single one of you can exhibit choices. You can decide whether you want to be associate of Vinci, whether you don't want to, whatever the story is. And that's the problem. And then, of course, goals are not always shared. So our drive around systems thinking moves way beyond Churchman, way beyond Sengi, way beyond all of these guys. And hence, when we stand up in the systems thinking class and we actually start off the workshop saying, what do you people understand? I've read the 5th discipline or whatever the story, and I'm saying, please throw it away. What we are trying to show you is a process that is actually working, that you can take back into your work environment and start viewing your organization from a systems point of view. So we say that you've got to have different methods to do this, and we actually then talk about in systems thinking this changing the method of inquiry from analysis to synthesis. Synthesis forming a whole of the parts. So we'll stand up in the classroom and ask one of the students, you know, tell me a typical problem in your classroom. Sales are down in our company. And I say, so what have you done? Well, they've just fired the sales executive. And what did you do? We brought this whiz kid, and what's happening? It's worse off. Well, systemically, it might have nothing to do with sales. It might have all to do with that you got the wrong product, or your positioning in the marketplace is completely incorrect. So we talk about that. Reductionism, that's what we try to avoid. So when Benny is adamant that we are not an MBA organization, it's critical that we try and, that's what he talks about, this whole model of Da Vinci tries to integrate everything around the fundamental philosophy. From cause and effect to produce a product. What we try to talk about is this environmental full theory. And we show the students how to view their organizations from what we call a stakeholder point of view. From determinism to indeterminism. And it's difficult for people to understand. It's probabilistic, observe and discover, and then from research to design. Very, very important that we are fundamentally convinced that the notion of design is a very important thing. And I'm not going to spend too much time, because what we then do is we talk about why you look at systems thinking, what are the key drivers. We also reinforce the notion of boundaries and subcomponents and subsystems, just to show that people that even if you're looking at your little department, because we get, you know, the hand goes up, particularly when we talk to government department, I could do nothing, they say. We are completely bureaucratized, and, you know, if we'd had to change something, we'd have to change something at the premier of our province or the story is. And we say, even in your subsystem, you can make a radical change by viewing it as a subsystem. And the same rules that apply to the bigger system apply to the subsystem. So we also spend quite a lot of time on open and closed systems, and we now are looking at some different stuff there. And just so that you don't walk out of here and criticize us, we do recognize chaos theory. The reason at the moment why we are not really sort of hell-bent on chaos theory is that I don't think that there's a level of comfort that you can actually take what's been done in chaos theory. Maybe Margaret Wheatley might be some of the stuff that you could look at and actually turn around and say, here is something that we would, from a Da Vinci point of view, feel comfortable. Bearing in mind that what we want students to do in a mode 2 environment is have an opportunity to solve real problems. So we want to be able to give them stuff that is value. But we do talk about chaos theory. In the post-modern assignment, by the way, in systems thinking, they are expected to actually look at some issues around chaos theory. When we talk about systems thinking, oh, what's happened there? Okay, well, I don't know what's happening there, but we try to expose the students to this notion of the 3 states of the system, and this is where we start actually moving towards what we call design thinking. So what we say is that one of the key things is that you're all pretty good at telling me exactly what's going on in the system right now. But the real question that I want to ask you is, what happens if you continue to manage the system the way it is at the moment and ignore external factors? Exactly what we're doing in South Africa. So we will talk a lot about South Africa because it's a wonderful case study. So we say, if you continue to manage the system and you ignore what's going on, you will deteriorate to what we call an as it will be, and that's the early warning system. So just for those of you who know, we at every election time, we do a systems map of South Africa, and at the moment I'm more enthusiastic about South Africa now than I was on the 27th of April 1994, because I think that there might be some very interesting things. And I said to the students a couple of weeks ago that maybe in 4 or 5 months' time you might consider Julius Malema as a national hero. We then go to the 3rd state of the system, and I'm sorry, there's something wrong here. And this 3rd state of the system is as it should be. And what we say there is that if you want to redesign your system, you need to actually have some kind of a dream. You need to know where you're going. And here we talk about, this is what we call the Da Vinci way. Sorry about this. And this is where we actually apply design. Now, over the years, there have been lots of discussions in Da Vinci about whether this is a relevant model. So many people around the world say, if you understand this, you have a pretty good idea about what's going on over here, you can then, with some confidence, look at designing the new system using a design methodology. And the point about this is that this makes some tacit assumptions. And the assumptions that it makes is that if you move from here to there, the leaders, managerial leadership again, understand the system. And when we started to play around, and this is the debate that Benny and I and a number of our colleagues have in Da Vinci, we start talking about this notion. So what the debate, and I want you to just get this, that we are constantly looking at things. We don't just accept that what we've got. So the debate was, and we spoke about this notion about what happened in Zimbabwe. You know, every South African turns around and says, it could never happen in South Africa. And so we try to look at the difference between the kind of mindset that existed in South Africa in 1994 and what happened in Zimbabwe. And in Zimbabwe, they spoke about this notion of a liberation organization coming in, and what we then decided is that if you have a transactional mindset, you're going to get yourself into trouble, and if you have a transformational mindset, we talk about this as the positive, as it will be from a positive point of view. And so we've taken our model and gone about introducing what we call a 4th state of the system. And so remember what we had is the as is, and we said if you carry on managing it to be as it will be. We now introduce this 4th state, which talks about, and it'll come to you now, the as it could be. And we then bring into the systems thinking issues this notion of the tipping point, and talk a bit about the whole concept about what happens when the organization moves into chaos. I don't know. I'm glad to see our IT people are here today. You see why I get so uptight.
Sure.
It'll come to you. Okay. So what we're saying is that in Da Vinci now we're moving towards this notion of a 4th state, that we can actually, in a transformational environment, you'll get to the stage where you can actually redesign the organization with that systemic mindset. If you're on a transactional mindset, we believe that that's where you get yourself into serious trouble. And what we talk about in this transactional mindset is this concept of unintended consequences, which is a very, very important part. So when we start off in systems thinking, we point out to them about this concept of unintended consequences. Okay, I want to just quickly then take you towards the end of this thing and just show you what happens. So you can see now that when we talk about this concept of design, this is where our design thinking comes in. And what we've said, and we've proved it now probably over the last 3 or 4 years, we have been privileged to be engaged in some major challenges in both private and public sector organizations, both locally and internationally. And we've shown now that this process that has been co-designed between us and the guys at Pennsylvania is working incredibly well. And so when we talk about design thinking, we talk about it as this embedded design as a thinking philosophy, very important. We talk about it as a fundamental shift, because what we're trying to say to people is that your linear approach no longer works. We're talking about solving complex problems, and we're hoping that you can, in the end, produce sustainable solutions. We talk then about an interactive planning process, and this is critically fundamental to the design thinking methodology, where it is continuous, holistic, and participating. What we try to show how critically important it is to involve the whole organization. So the difference here is that instead of the executive going away, or Zuma taking his cabinet and going away for a lechotla and come back after 3 days and say, this is how we're going to run the country for the next year, or this is how we're going to run the company for the next year, you engage in a serious rethink of the organization using systems thinking to redesign the organization. And we always tell the story about a major commercial electronics company in South Africa. Turnover is a couple of billion rand. When we spoke to the chief executive, oh, by the way, the only organizations that use design thinking are either ones who are in serious trouble and all the conventional linear methods don't work anymore, or ones who are doing better and ones who are doing well and who want to do better. And this chief executive from this electronics company said, who should be part of this process? And we said, the lady at reception. She's the one who welcomed us here today. And he said, what the bloody hell does she know? And the interesting thing is, she knew about what happens in this organization than many of the executives do. So in this process, we talk about two very distinct activities. We talk about what we call the mess formulation, and we talk about the idealized design. So in systems and design thinking, they are all sensitized towards systems thinking, and then we break the organization into two distinct activities. A team that looks at the mess, and I'll talk to you about that, and a second team that looks at the idealized design. And what happens is that when the mess team has finished their work, and the idealized design team has finished their work, we bring the two teams together, and we see whether this idealized design has what we call dissolve the mess. And if there are any gaps, we try and close those gaps, and then we go into the conventional process of how do you now go and redesign your organization? What funding do you require? What people do you require? And all of those good things. So this is what the process is all about, the mess formulation, the idealized design. And in the mess formulation, we really talk about this concept I showed you, that as it will be state, what will happen, what is taking place, that the organization will eventually destroy itself. So this is a very detailed process to get a factual, hard-nosed reality check about what's happening in the organization. Just to entertain Benny, you know, this is the stuff that Benny loves, the knowns and the unknowns. And what we try to show the students is really where the messes fit, in the unknown unknowns. What we're trying to show them is how critically important it is for you not to have a preconceived idea about what you think the real challenges are facing the organization. That you actually expand your horizon. So when we were involved in redesigning South African Bureau Standards, it took 3 months to develop the mess. Because they had to go through everybody, their competitors, their customers, the shareholder, which was government, their own people. And those are the things we talk about. So we show the students how the mess formulation process works. And by the way, in the classroom, they will do a small design thinking activity on their organization. Because we want them to walk away having understood, what's going on. So here, don't worry too much about this, because if we're going to get you all together, we'll do a design thinking exercise on Da Vinci when we meet for the half day. Critically important, as I said to you, is we need to understand what we call the stakeholder view of the organization from a systemic point of view. We're saying, here you're sitting over here, that's the operating environment. Do you consider what's standing outside? These are organizations that to your peril you ignore. And these are organizations that you might not have direct control over, but they have a direct impact on your organization. And for example, every single time we work with government, we say to them, is this ready to cover all the stakeholders? And then we say to them, what about the press? Press is a critical stakeholder. And you guys don't know how to manage the press. And then sitting outside that are the contextual environment where we're looking at all these key issues that drive it. We teach them in the classroom, unashamedly, some tools. And one of the tools that we teach them is a causal loop analysis. And I know some of you might feel ill, but we think that in Da Vinci we've come up with a very elegant way of showing students how to use causal loops. They walk away from here feeling pretty comfortable to use causal loops. This is what we sent to President Zuma not so long ago. This was a causal loop diagram on the welfare system, and what we showed him is that the South African welfare system is fundamentally flawed. It encourages business to move out, there's less incentive to work, increases the number of needy, it increases migration to South Africa and all of those good things. This is work that we did with Telkom. In the classroom, this came out, by the way. We had a group of Telkom students, all senior managers in Telkom. We asked them, what's the biggest challenge? And they said, the biggest challenge is customer satisfaction. And we said, so what have you done about that? And they informed us that they'd spent millions of rands sending all their frontline managers on Hug Your Customer courses. So we said, well, what's the problem? 4 months after the last person attended the course, their customer rating was lower than it was before the course. And so out of the causal loop diagram came this interesting thing. That Telkom's problem was not customer satisfaction, it's cable theft. Now that's actually quite a serious realization, because as long as you're focusing on this and you're forgetting about the fact that if somebody steals your cable, you can take them out to dinner, you can send them champagne, you can send them flowers. The reality is that cable has gone. And as a result of that, they then went into bed with Eskom on trying to solve those things. So there are lots of tools. There's causal loop, there's what we call the CVP proposition. I feel ill about this, but we even say you can use, Porter's 5 forces. I think when I see this, I just say to the students, I just want to be ill, because this is the classic. They'll all talk about Porter's 5 forces. But if you want to use it, you can use it as a tool to try and identify the mess. What happens at the end of the mess is that the organizations are then, the mess team, is then required to present this. And this is this electronics company. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but they presented to their company. They did a CNN news broadcast, and in fact it was, telling the story, and it was a CNN breaking news, and they showed a video with the Titanic sinking. And the end of the slide was a coffin on the ocean, and at the XYZ company, rest in peace. With an opera company here, the opera singers themselves got involved in redesigning their own company, and when they presented the mess to the board of trustees, they had a person on a portable organ playing funeral music. And so it's quite dramatic. But what happens in the mess formulation, it's the harsh reality. And what we explain is that leaders don't like to hear this. This is the truth, because everything in the mess is verifiable, it's factual, and you can actually show how, what trouble the organization is. All right, so when we talk about the design, we talk about really how do you actually understand the system and how do you redesign the system. And the most important thing is that you start off with the premise that the organization that you know was destroyed last night. Extremely difficult. So we now ask these students, take your kind of view of the organization from a system, but actually consciously prevent yourself from thinking what's happening right now. So you're given a clean slate of paper, and you can now actually go and actually redesign the organization. And so also, we don't get involved in this notion in 5 years' time, Da Vinci wants to be the premier private university in this country. We say, what do you want to have right now? So once again, it focuses the students on the harsh realities, and they do this. And as once again, just to reinforce the notion of forecasts, we talk about assumptions of the future, not forecasts of the future. And we say to the students, we carry spare tires in our cars, not because we forecast a flat tire on our next trip, but we assume one is possible. It's extremely difficult to get this mindset into people because our students come here with an incredibly linear view. When we develop strategic planning, we do SWOT analysis. I love it. I say to them, tell me, what does your SWOT analysis look like? And their strengths are like this, and the weaknesses are like that, you see. And the threats, no, we don't have threats. We try to get them out of that mindset. So when we talk about forecasts, we talk to them about alleged probabilities, and when we talk about assumptions, they're about conceived possibilities. Clearly, the idealized design must be realistic, and therefore it's got to be technologically feasible and operationally viable. And because it's capable of change, we talk about the fact that it must be capable of learning and adaptation. We talk about a particular organization that we were doing work with, and in the middle of them redesigning the company, there was a strong rumor that they were going to buy out their opposition. How do you create a new design that could, in fact, incorporate the opposition? And therefore, we say that it's not perfect. And when we talk about this, once again, quite proud in Da Vinci, we talk about what we call reverse engineering the future. We try to show, that's Steve Shepard's PhD at Da Vinci. What he showed was instead of saying, I'm here now and I want to go over there, why don't you think about, I want to start from where I want to be and work backwards. And it's a very elegant process. So we reinforce work that's been done by a student at Da Vinci in his PhD where he spoke about reverse engineering the future, working backwards. Once again, trying all the time to bring this thing into reality and also talk about, we are very proud of Da Vinci students and what they've done and actually take some of that learning from PhDs and master's theses and bring them back into the organization. We talk about crowdsourcing, and within the idealized design, we have a design process using the acronym Da Vinci, and it works quite well. So we talk about, they start off looking at the design criteria, they look at alternative designs. Once they've got a design, they'll actually then go and look at how they're going to make that work. We then turn around and say that maybe before you even go and present this as an ideal design, go and test it on some stakeholders. You'll have to modify the model. You then decide what the critical success factors are and then look at the implementation. So in South African Bureau of Standards, for example, we went for 4 different designs, iterations. Benny came across earlier on talking about decision making. How do you decide between those 4 designs? And there's lots of things that you need to look at. So that's the design process. And then just to end off by saying that this is what we say. He who rejects change is the architect of decay. The only human institution that rejects progress is the cemetery. Thanks very much. Right, so are there any questions or any concerns? I'm very happy to answer them. But what I've done very quickly is to try and give you a taste about what we hope when those people come into your areas of specialization, we hope we've inculcated some of this mindset. Driving, when we start off management of technology, we ask them, look at your organization from a systems point of view. Innovation, systems point of view. So we try all the time to bring this concept of systems thinking, and particularly around the social system. Okay.
There's no questions.
I think that's fine. I just say it was quite powerful when you were more on the fast lane, but I think it's there's a lot of content that we need to consider and synthesize. Something that is like you were saying, most of the things that you say is half day or a full day of discussion that needs to happen.
Yeah.
In order to concretize it, I think maybe we need to make more of it apply. Because what I see is most of the things that we've talked about there, they stop at implementation stage. Whereas if you look at the world that we are there, where we are slaves, it's slaves that do the work. So it is that part of the work that is not done that needs to be part and parcel of our implementation content. I think it's quite critical.
But you know, just for example, on the guys doing project management, there is so much work being done on why projects fail. And if you look at it, in 99% of the times, it's because they haven't considered the system. And that's what we try to do. We want you to go and start off and saying, who has experienced a failed project? And why has that project failed? Just take Medupi. Is there an Eskom person here? Because they should be shot. Eskom started Medupi Power Station without actually understanding that they were going to bring 70,000 workers into a town that had what? 3,000 inhabitants. No sewage, no water. And then, when the power station's finished, hundreds of employees are going to be there, no housing. And then you turn around and you say, how can you do this? And Kusili is the same story. So we're trying to emphasize everything that you do. The systems thinking is so elegant. And if you are able to just continuously reinforce this, these people will think differently. They really will.
I think that's the challenge that we have. So they hear systems as an example. But when they get to the project management blocks, then that's never reiterated. Roy, just a comment from my side. How do we deal with this thing of understanding when you do the right thing wrong and the wrong thing right? I mean, how do we deal with that?
Well, what we do, what we do in the systems thinking is that we start off by saying, and we make this statement from Zandi, where he says that as managers, we spend 95% of our time solving the wrong problem. And then we try to show them that through an embedding process, how you can actually start looking at what the real problem is. Now, just for anecdotally, just to tell you an interesting story, which Benny's heard 50 million times, but most of our Da Vinci people haven't heard. When Zandi came out to South Africa, and we sat down and worked with him from a Da Vinci point of view, he went back to the United States of America, and the university interviewed him and said, what happened there? And he said, well, we had this amazing experience. The South Africans have got real problems. We, at Wharton, they just employ professors. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar organization. I saw 2 years ago, I told Benny, their fundraising target just for that year was $5 billion. Not million, $5 billion. They own the half of Philadelphia. And so they've got all these professors sitting in rooms who can just think about systems thinking, but no real opportunity to actually practice it. And there was an article that appeared from Wharton in the New York Times on the Sunday. And the mayor of New York read this thing. And he was faced with the following problem. In the mid-1990s, towards the end of the 1990s, there was a huge squatter problem in New York. And the immediate reaction of the mayor of the city of New York was to call all these people in and said, I want you to get rid of those squatters. And his notion was, find alternate accommodation. And so they went in an exercise and looked at how they could find alternate accommodation for these squatters. And they came out with a solution that they could actually take some of the disused buildings in the Port Authority, these old warehouses, and by the time they'd finished converting these things into some kind of livable accommodation, it was going to cost millions and millions of dollars. Now, Benny says, how do we do this? Zandi went and he said to the mayor, why have you got a squatter problem? He said, I don't know. He said, well, go and investigate it. They found that at that stage, the majority of squatters were Puerto Ricans. He said, why are they Puerto Ricans? And they found out that these people were moving out of Puerto Rico because there was a major problem in Puerto Rico, and that was a corrupt government. So the problem wasn't a squatter problem in New York, it was corruption in Puerto Rico. And what they then did is that they engaged with the Puerto Rican government. So a large number of those squatters went back because they actually created small businesses for these people to go back. And so what we try to do is to all the time instill in this that you have to enjoy the luxury of standing back out of this. And before you have this knee-jerk reaction, this is what makes us really worried in Da Vinci. That a student will come here and say, this is the latest thing, what's it? Management by objectives, or whatever the story is, They'll come with this new tool and the company's going with this. This is going to solve our problems. And we show an interesting thing, I just want to just show you because it is just quite pertinent. When I was in America, Benny knows this, in September last year, these guys asked me the question. They said, I want to ask you a question. He said, here's the reality. He said that in the United States of America, over the last 35 years, the average lifespan of individuals has gone from between 55 to 60 to about 75. So lots of people are living really well, are living well. And they've extended the lifespan. Could be good or could be bad. But the real question that my friend Professor Prudino, who is a professor here at Da Vinci, a fellow of Da Vinci, he says, but why, during exactly the same period, has the average life of American companies dropped from 75 years to 15 years?
Say that again, please.
So, the average lifespan over 35 years has gone from 60 to 75?
Of people.
Of people, sorry, the lifespan of people. And the lifespan of companies has gone from 75 years down to 15 years. He said, why has that happened? And he says, the first thing that we need to do is saying, what are the medical people doing that is fundamentally different from her old profession, the consultants? And so he says that the medical people, and this is quite important from a marketing point of view, they talk about translational consulting. They will identify that there is a particular disease that's floating around, and they'll go into the laboratory and do some excellent work. And when they come out, they will do all these clinical trials. And they will also, once they actually, this thing has become a patented drug, they are also going to be very, very careful that they're not going to say everybody in South Africa will respond the same way to this drug. There might be different conditions in the paper from the Western Cape, whatever the story is. So they're all the time involved in translational, what they call translational medicine. Jean and I know only too well that what do the consultants do? The consultants say, listen here, there is an ideal model for your company. See? Now what we're going to do, and they all have got it, Deloitte, PwC, Accenture, all that, say, we are going to now take you with our people and we're going to actually go through this thing. And by the way, if you actually get every single one of these boxes sorted out, this is the ideal company. So what happens? Eskom last year, I think it's going to come out soon, has spent hundreds of millions of rands. Hundreds of millions of rands on consultants. They are worse off now than they were before the consultants came. What's the story? Deloitte's and McKinsey's, who are the biggest people, turn around and say, it's got nothing to do with this process, because you guys, as management, failed to implement what we told you to do. And the difference is that in systems and design thinking, the organization designs us. We do not consult. We facilitate the process. So when they build a model which is specific to South African Bureau of Standards, or specific to Da Vinci, whatever the story is, they are actually designing themselves. Because the Eskom staff will tell you, senior managers who are doing masters and PhDs will tell you, this guy from Deloitte sat at my desk for 4 weeks. I did an absolute core dump on him. All he did is that he can do graphics better than I can. Because when I went and saw the presentation they made to Brian Doms, the chief executive, it's my work. But because Eskom didn't follow this, because they didn't implement that, that's why the model failed. And I think that that's also part of the problem, is that we've got to try and create this mindset of a totally different approach. So it's about doing the right things and doing things right and doing the right things. So you can turn around and say, Brian Doms, one of the best tick box managers in the world. Tactically, you can't fail him. Strategically, what's his biggest failure? He never understood that the minister was his boss. He never understood that the chairman of Eskom was put in there not because Zara Tsotsi is a great guy, but because politically they wanted to have him there. And so we try to, sort of instill that kind of mindset. Think systemically. But it is a challenge. It really is. Okay, we're in. Over to you, boss.